Moscow's international airport was at its peak of activity, with the sound of luggage rolling across the marble floor and the buzz of voices in different languages filling the air. Among the hundreds of hurried passengers, one man stood out for his calmness and simplicity: Ivan Petrov. Wearing a worn leather jacket and faded boots, he carried a canvas bag that had seen better days. His tired but curious eyes scanned the vast terminal, while his calloused hands tightly gripped his first-class ticket. For Ivan, this moment was both a dream and a necessity. It was his first flight, and he was nervous but determined. The medical appointment awaiting him in St. Petersburg was urgent, a glimmer of hope amidst the difficult news he had recently received. He knew his rustic appearance would attract attention, but he hadn't anticipated what was about to unfold. In the first-class lounge, Ekaterina Ivanova observed the hustle and bustle with disdain. Dressed in a flawless designer outfit and sporting a pair of sunglasses that concealed her critical eyes, she was the embodiment of luxury. Accustomed to the finest things life could offer, she sipped her artisanal coffee while scrolling through messages on her phone, oblivious to the people around her, until the peculiar smell reached her. Turning with a look of distaste, her eyes landed on Ivan, who had just entered the lounge. The smell of hay and dirt, which to him was a mark of his life on the farm, seemed like an offense to Ekaterina. She wrinkled her nose, leaned toward the flight attendant, and whispered something, discreetly pointing toward Ivan. The attendant hesitated, but couldn't ignore the socialite's insistence. Minutes later, Ivan was approached by a crew member. He politely explained that he had a legitimate first-class ticket, but his firm voice contrasted with his obvious discomfort. Impatient, Ekaterina stood up and said loudly enough for other passengers to hear, "It's absurd to allow someone smelling like animals to sit here. We're on a first-class flight, not in a barn." Ivan felt his face flush, but took a deep breath. He knew that reacting would be pointless. With a polite smile, he replied, "Madam, I purchased my seat here just like anyone else. The smell of the earth is part of my life, just as your perfume is a part of yours." The response, though calm, sparked a murmur in the lounge. Some passengers looked on with curiosity, but no one dared intervene. Under pressure from Ekaterina, the attendant suggested that Ivan be relocated to economy class, promising to compensate him with a voucher. Ivan nodded without protest. He knew the fight wasn't worth it. With his dignity intact, he grabbed his bag and headed toward the aisle leading to economy. As he passed Ekaterina, he gave her a calm yet firm look that left her momentarily unsettled. When the flight began, Ekaterina relaxed in her leather seat, satisfied that she had resolved the problem, but Ivan, squeezed into an economy seat, couldn't stop thinking about how he had been treated. It wasn't the discomfort of the cramped space that affected him, but the disdain with which he had been judged simply because of his appearance and smell. As he gazed at the clouds through the small window, Ivan reflected on the irony of his situation. He had sacrificed so much to ensure this trip. The first-class ticket wasn't a luxury for him, but a practical necessity due to his health condition. Now, the humiliation he had suffered seemed like a minor obstacle compared to the real reason for his journey: the chance to fight for a few more years by his son Dmitri's side and on his farm. At the end of the flight, Ekaterina crossed paths with Ivan again in the baggage claim area. He was patiently retrieving his bag while she passed by with her team, carrying expensive luggage. Upon seeing him, she muttered under her breath, "People like him don't belong in these spaces." Ivan heard but didn't respond. He simply looked at Ekaterina with a calm that hid his indignation. Inside, he promised himself that this wouldn't be the last time their paths would cross. Little did Ekaterina know that the man she had humiliated carried a destiny that would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. Ivan Petrov stepped off the plane, feeling the physical toll of traveling in economy class. The cramped seats and the crew's indifferent treatment contrasted with the comfort he had hoped for when he bought the first-class ticket. Yet, he didn't let it get to him. His thoughts were focused on the reason he was headed to St. Petersburg, the medical consultation that could offer hope for his health. As Ivan walked out with his worn bag, Ekaterina Ivanova strutted through the terminal like a queen in her palace. As she passed Ivan, she couldn't resist throwing one more degrading comment. They should open an exclusive terminal for people like that. I don't understand why they allow certain types in the same spaces as us. Ivan, maintaining his dignified posture, didn't respond. He simply gripped his bag tighter and continued his way. That was just another example of the arrogance he had faced since his arrival at the airport. In the days that followed, Ivan and Ekaterina's lives took different paths. While Ekaterina attended luxurious social events, boasting about her million-dollar investments, Ivan faced the harsh reality of his medical appointment. The diagnosis he had feared was confirmed: advanced cancer that required immediate treatment. The doctor warned him about the severity of his condition, but Ivan refused to crumble. There was still so much to do. He needed to ensure that his farm, his family's legacy, remained intact. Back in his hometown, Ivan found refuge in his work. In the simplicity of the farm, the sound of animals and the smell of the earth provided a sense of peace. Dmitri, his only son, helped him whenever possible, dividing his time between his studies in the big city and the family farm. The young man was unaware of the seriousness of his father's health condition, and Ivan preferred to keep it that way. Dmitri had his own dreams and plans, and Ivan didn't want to be a burden. Meanwhile, Ekaterina, in the midst of her corporate meetings, faced a new challenge. Her daughter, Anastasia Ivanova, had started a relationship with a young man she didn't know well. Always protective, Ekaterina tried to investigate the young man's life, but Anastasia Ivanova, determined to preserve her privacy, avoided answering her mother's questions. Anastasia Ivanova was in love with Dmitri, but she knew that her mother would never approve of the relationship if she found out about the young man's humble origins. For Ekaterina, social status was as important as, if not more than, character. Dmitri, on the other hand, struggled with the dilemma of introducing his family to Anastasia Ivanova or keeping the relationship a secret. He knew that his simple background would be a problem for someone like Ekaterina Ivanova. One evening, while Ivan and Dmitri were talking at the dinner table, Ivan finally decided to reveal the seriousness of his condition to his son. Dmitri was shocked and tried to convince his father to seek treatment in Moscow, but Ivan explained that he had already explored all possible options. Time was short, and Ivan wanted to use what little he had left to ensure Dmitri would have a secure future. A few weeks later, Ivan and Ekaterina's paths would cross again, this time in an unexpected way. Ekaterina, in search of new land to expand one of her real estate projects, identified a promising area in the countryside. Her team informed her that the land belonged to a local farmer, one Ivan Petrov. Upon hearing the name, Ekaterina took a moment to connect the man to the one she had humiliated at the airport. Determined to close the deal, she decided to visit the farm in person, believing that any farmer would accept a generous offer without hesitation. While the powerful businesswoman prepared for her trip, Ivan, on the other hand, was focused on training Dmitri to take care of the farm. He knew he could no longer delay this responsibility. The farm was more than just a piece of land. It was the essence of his family, built with sweat and sacrifice. Ivan wouldn't allow it to be taken by speculators or turned into a soulless venture. The meeting between Ivan and Ekaterina was about to take place again, but this time under circumstances neither of them could foresee. And with it would come secrets and connections that would change the course of their lives forever. It was a peaceful morning at the Petrov farm. Ivan watched the field with a contemplative gaze, feeling the fresh scent of the earth mixed with the fragrance of wildflowers growing along the edges of the property. Dmitri was in the stable, taking care of the horses, while Ivan prepared for another day of work. The calm was interrupted by the sound of a luxury car approaching on the dirt road. As Ivan went out to greet the visitors, he saw a sleek black vehicle stop at the entrance. The door opened, and out stepped Ekaterina Ivanova, accompanied by an assistant. Wearing sunglasses and high heels that sank slightly into the dirt, she cast a quick glance at the property, evaluating the land as if it were a product on a shelf. Her eyes landed on Ivan, and she took a few seconds to recognize him. "You?" she said, removing her sunglasses with a swift motion. "The man from the plane?" Ivan maintained a calm demeanor, even in the face of Ekaterina's surprise and arrogant tone. "Yes, madam. Welcome to my farm. How can I help you?" Ekaterina disguised her discomfort and got straight to the point. She explained that she represented a company interested in buying the farm for a large real estate project. She presented a generous financial offer, which she believed would be irresistible. Ivan listened patiently, but at the end of her presentation, he shook his head. "I appreciate your visit and the offer, but this land is not for sale. It has been in my family for generations and will remain so." Ivan's firm response caught Ekaterina off guard. She tried to insist, talking about the benefits of the project for the region and the importance of progress. However, Ivan remained steadfast. "Progress does not mean destroying our roots, Mrs. Ivanova. This farm is more than just land. It is the legacy of my family." The tension between the two was palpable. Ekaterina, accustomed to always getting what she wanted, didn't easily accept a refusal. She decided that she would try another approach soon, confident that Ivan would change his mind with time. Meanwhile, Dmitri, curious about the conversation at the entrance, came out of the stable and saw Ekaterina for the first time. He froze when he recognized her from photos on Anastasia Ivanova's phone. She was her mother. He felt a chill run down his spine when he realized that the woman who despised his father was the same one who could one day become his mother-in-law. Ekaterina, for her part, didn't yet know about the connection between Dmitri and her daughter. When she saw him, she gave him a brief, uninterested look, assuming he was just a farm worker. Dmitri avoided eye contact and quickly returned to the stable, disturbed by the possibility of Anastasia Ivanova finding out about the situation and their relationship becoming more complicated. Later that day, Dmitri met with Anastasia Ivanova at a cafe in the city. He decided it was time to tell the truth. He explained who his father was and mentioned the confrontation with Ekaterina at the farm. Anastasia Ivanova was shocked. Although she was in love with Dmitri, she knew that her mother would never accept the relationship, especially now that there was direct conflict between their families. "We need to tell your mother everything," Dmitri said, worried. "I can't hide who I am anymore." Anastasia Ivanova hesitated, but agreed. She knew that sooner or later, the truth would come out. A few days later, at a dinner hosted by Ekaterina, Anastasia Ivanova gathered the courage to introduce Dmitri to her mother. The socialite was initially impressed by the young man's composure and manners, but when Dmitri mentioned his surname, the air in the room became heavy. Ekaterina stared at the young man in disbelief. "Petrov? You're the son of that farmer?" Dmitri remained calm despite the harsh tone. "Yes, ma'am. Ivan Petrov is my father." Ekaterina's initial shock quickly turned into irritation. To her, it felt like an insult. But as she looked at her daughter, she realized that Anastasia Ivanova was not willing to give up Dmitri. For the first time in years, Ekaterina felt powerless. Her arrogance wouldn't be enough, to resolve the situation. Meanwhile, Ivan, in the tranquility of his farm, sensed that something was about to change. He knew that Ekaterina's visit and Dmitri's connection to Anastasia Ivanova would bring complications. But Ivan wasn't afraid to confront his fate. The only thing he wouldn't give up was his integrity and the future of his land. The dinner at Ekaterina's house ended in uncomfortable silence, but the war between the values of the two families was only beginning. The next morning, Ekaterina Ivanova arrived at the Petrov farm, determined to convince Ivan to sell the property. She was accompanied by her lawyer and an architect, ready to present a new offer that she considered irresistible. But as she stepped out of her luxury car, she was greeted by a scene that made her pause for a moment. Ivan was sitting on an old wooden bench, feeding the chickens with a serene expression. In the background, the golden wheat fields swayed gently in the breeze, and the sound of animals filled the air. The simplicity of the environment stood in stark contrast to Ekaterina's life, so full of meetings and deadlines. For a brief moment, she felt disconnected from her world. "Good morning," Mrs. Ivanova said to Ivan, standing up to greet her. "Looks like you haven't given up yet." "I'm not one to give up easily, Mr. Petrov," she replied firmly. "I'm here to present an offer that, I'm sure, will benefit both of us." Ivan, with a restrained smile, invited her to sit on the porch of the house. He knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to convince someone like Ekaterina. So, as she began to present her ideas, Ivan gently interrupted. "Before we talk about numbers and contracts, let me show you something." Curious, but still skeptical, Ekaterina followed him. Ivan led her along a small dirt path to the fields. He explained how the farm operated, the daily work, the innovations he had implemented to increase productivity, and how the land sustained not only his family, but many others in the region. As they walked, Ekaterina watched Ivan interact with the animals and the farm workers. She saw how he was respected and how he spoke to everyone with humility, but also with a natural authority. This unsettled her, though she didn't know why. "This farm is not just a piece of land," said Ivan, stopping to look at the fields. "It's the history of my family. Every plant, every stone, every animal here carries the work of generations. I can't just sell it. I understand your emotional attachment, but the world is changing," Ekaterina countered, trying to hide the impact Ivan's sincerity was having on her. "And sometimes we need to leave the past behind to build something bigger." "Bigger for who?" Ivan answered calmly. "For investors, for luxury clients. My concern isn't just for myself. What about the region? The people who depend on this land to live? Have you thought about what progress could cost them?" Ekaterina fell silent. She had never stopped to think about these things. To her, progress had always meant growth and wealth. But there, in front of Ivan and the simplicity of the farm, those certainties began to seem hollow. At the end of the visit, as Ekaterina walked back to the car, something unexpected happened. She tripped slightly on a stone in the path and instinctively grabbed onto Ivan to avoid falling. The brief but genuine contact was enough to create a small crack in her armor of arrogance. "Thank you," she said, quickly composing herself. "I hope you reconsider my offer." Ivan nodded but said nothing more. He watched as Ekaterina got into the car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind. That night, Ekaterina sat in her luxurious living room, surrounded by modern art and expensive furniture, but feeling strangely empty. Ivan's words echoed in her mind. For the first time, she began to question whether what she called progress was really what the world needed. Ivan's serene face, marked by time and struggle, seemed to carry a truth she had ignored all her life. Meanwhile, at the farm, Ivan told Dmitri about Ekaterina's visit. Dmitri was worried, knowing that the conflict between his family and Anastasia Ivanova's family could intensify. But Ivan, with his usual calm, reassured his son, "The truth always finds its way, Dmitri. And in the end, things will be as they should be." The change in Ekaterina was just beginning. The arrogance that had once defined her was starting to give way to a reflection she never imagined she would be capable of. And that was just the first step on a journey that would transform her life forever. A few weeks after her visit to the farm, Ekaterina Ivanova couldn't forget Ivan's words. The image of him, tending to the land with a devotion she had never understood, remained vivid in her mind. Still, she hadn't given up on her proposal. However, this time, she decided to change her approach. Back at the farm, Ekaterina arrived without her business entourage and without her usual superior attitude. She wore simpler, though still elegant, clothes and carried a notebook. Ivan greeted her with the same calm hospitality as always, but this time, he noticed something different about the businesswoman. There was less arrogance in her posture. "I've thought a lot about what you said about this land," Ekaterina began, as they walked through the fields once again. "I admit that I've never considered the human impact of my projects. To me, progress was simply creating something new, bigger. But now I see that maybe that's not always the best path." Ivan smiled slightly, but didn't respond immediately. He led her to a small shed at the back of the property where he stored equipment and documents. There, he presented something that surprised Ekaterina: his plans for the farm. "I've spent the last few years developing sustainable farming techniques that can be applied to small properties like this one," Ivan explained. "My idea was to expand this to other farms in the region, creating a network that could help not only the farmers, but also the surrounding communities." Ekaterina carefully flipped through the papers. The diagrams and calculations showed a detailed and visionary plan, but with an obvious problem. Ivan didn't have the resources to implement his ideas on a large scale. "It's impressive, but you'll need investment for this to work," Ekaterina said, looking directly at Ivan. "Yes, but money has never been my strength," he replied with a slight touch of humor. "My concern has always been hard work. The rest, well, I was hoping to find a way." As she analyzed the documents, Ekaterina began to see something she had never considered: a true purpose in his work. She had always led her projects with a focus on profits, but now, for the first time, she saw the possibility of using her resources for something that could transform lives in a meaningful way. "I have a proposal for you, Mr. Petrov," she said finally. "And it's not to buy your land. I want to help finance this project. With my experience in management and your knowledge of agriculture, we can turn your ideas into something grand." Ivan looked at Ekaterina in surprise. He hadn't expected that offer. It was clear that something had changed in the woman since her first visit. "Why would you do that?" he asked cautiously. "Because you're right," Ekaterina replied honestly. "I can't keep ignoring the impact of what I do. And to be frank, I think I have a lot to learn from you." The two spent the rest of the day discussing the details of a possible partnership. Ekaterina suggested turning the farm into a model for other properties in the region, while Ivan insisted that the focus should first be on benefiting the local people. Despite their differences, they both agreed to work together. Meanwhile, Dmitri and Anastasia Ivanova watched from a distance, relieved to see the families finally finding common ground. Dmitri, especially, felt a mixture of pride and relief as he saw his father being recognized for what he truly was: a man of vision and integrity. In the following days, Ekaterina returned to the city with a new purpose. She gathered her team and presented Ivan's plan as a priority project. Some executives were skeptical, but Ekaterina, for the first time in years, felt motivated to defend something that wasn't solely tied to profit. At the farm, Ivan began preparing the land to implement the changes. Despite his increasingly fragile health, he was determined to leave a legacy that would outlast him. The partnership between the two marked the beginning of a transformation that would affect not only their lives, but the entire region. As they worked side by side, Ekaterina began to see the world from a new perspective, learning to value things she had once dismissed. And Ivan, despite his physical limitations, found a new energy as he realized that his ideas would finally find the space they deserved. Together, they were about to create something bigger than either of them could have imagined. The sun shone over the Petrov farm as workers and volunteers gathered to prepare the site for a special event, Dmitry and Anastasia Ivanova's engagement. The celebration was more than just a union between two people. It symbolized the reconciliation of two families that had started out so distant. The farm, which had once been a source of discord, now served as a stage for unity. Ivan, despite his frail health, insisted on overseeing the preparations. He knew his days were numbered, but this only increased his determination to make everything perfect for his son's future. Dmitry, seeing him walk slowly across the field, insisted, "Dad, you should rest. We have plenty of people here to help." Ivan smiled, leaning on an improvised cane. "Don't worry, my son. Today is an important day. I want to enjoy every moment." Meanwhile, Ekaterina Ivanova arrived at the farm, accompanied by Anastasia Ivanova. Despite her initial reluctance to accept her daughter's relationship, Ekaterina now saw Dmitry in a new light. He was a hardworking, dedicated, and honorable young man, qualities she rarely saw in high society circles. Ekaterina surveyed the transformed site. The farm was livelier than ever, with the first implementations of Ivan's sustainable projects already in operation. Small farmers from the region were coming to learn from him, and the social impact was already noticeable. Still, she felt a tightness in her chest when she looked at Ivan. His fragile health was evident, but he refused to let it interfere. Just before the engagement ceremony was about to begin, Ivan asked for a moment alone with Ekaterina. The two walked to the old wooden bench under the shade of a tree, the same place where he liked to watch the fields. "Ekaterina, I want to thank you for what you've done," Ivan began, his voice slightly trembling. "Turning this farm into something greater was a dream I couldn't achieve alone." "You don't need to thank me," Ivan. Ekaterina replied sincerely. "If anyone has changed here, it's me. You've shown me a world I had never seen. And to be honest, I don't know if I would have understood this without your patience." The two exchanged a look of mutual respect, a bond that seemed unlikely months ago, but now was undeniable. The engagement ceremony began with the soft glow of the evening sun illuminating the fields. Dmitry and Anastasia Ivanova were radiant, surrounded by family, friends, and the farm workers. For many present, this wasn't just a celebration of a romantic union, but also a milestone in the history of the region. The Petrov farm, which had once been just a small piece of land, was now a symbol of renewal and hope. During dinner, Ekaterina made an unexpected announcement. Rising to speak, her voice echoed firmly, "I want to share something with all of you. When I first came here, my intention was to buy this farm and transform it into something completely different. But Ivan taught me something far more valuable, that progress doesn't need to destroy what is essential. I am committed to continuing to support the projects started here, ensuring their impact reaches far beyond this land." The applause echoed across the field, but Ivan knew there was more to be said. Rising with difficulty, he looked at Dmitry and Anastasia Ivanova, then at the guests. "I've lived a life full of challenges, but also full of meaning. My greatest pride is this land, and now my greatest legacy is you, Dmitry and Anastasia Ivanova. Keep taking care of this place, the people around it, and above all, each other." Many of the guests' eyes filled with tears. The moment was bittersweet, as everyone knew Ivan was bidding farewell, not just with words, but with his life as a whole. That night, while the sounds of the party still echoed in the distance, Ivan sat alone under the tree. Ekaterina found him there and sat beside him in silence. "You know, Ivan, I think we're more alike than I thought," she finally said. "Maybe," he replied with a tired smile. "But what matters is that we've learned from each other. That's already enough." The night continued with celebration, but for Ivan and Ekaterina, that moment marked the conclusion of a cycle. The farm was now a home not just for the Petrov family, but also for the vision they had built together, a more humane future, connected to its roots and open to true progress. And as Dmitry and Anastasia Ivanova danced under the stars, Ivan's legacy was already in good hands. Months passed since Dmitry and Anastasia Ivanova's engagement, and the Petrov farm had transformed into something Ivan had dreamed of, but would not live to see fully realized. His health declined rapidly after the event, and he passed away surrounded by close family and friends. His last wish was simple, that the legacy of the farm continued to flourish, not only for Dmitry, but for the entire community. Ekaterina Ivanova, who had once looked at Ivan with contempt, now saw him as one of the most important people to ever cross her path. His death impacted her deeply, not only because of the unexpected friendship they had built, but also because of the responsibility he had entrusted to her. In Ivan's will, a significant part of his ideas was formally shared with Ekaterina, not as a gift, but as a request to continue his work. Dmitry and Anastasia Ivanova, now married, took over the leadership of the farm. Under Ekaterina's guidance, they expanded the sustainable agriculture projects. The site became a model of innovation, attracting farmers from all over the country to learn the techniques Ivan had developed. The name Petrov Farm became synonymous with resilience and progress in agriculture. Ekaterina, in turn, underwent a definitive transformation. She divided her time between her businesses in Moscow and the farm. Although she still led real estate projects, she now applied the principles she had learned from Ivan, respecting the roots, considering the human impact, and working for a greater good. She often found herself sitting on the same bench where Ivan used to watch the fields, thinking about how her destiny had changed because of that humble, yet extraordinary man. Anastasia Ivanova, pregnant with their first child, and Dmitry decided to build their home on the farm. For them, it was not just the place where they would raise their family, but also the heart of Ivan's legacy. Every decision they made was guided by what they had learned from him, to value the land, the people, and the time. On a special day, Ekaterina and Dmitry inaugurated the Ivan Petrov Center for Sustainable Agriculture, located on the farm. The center aimed to teach farmers and young students about innovative techniques and conservation practices. The inauguration attracted authorities and journalists, but more importantly, it brought hope to rural communities facing difficulties. As Ekaterina walked through the center, she felt a mixture of pride and longing. Looking at a photo of Ivan on one of the walls, she smiled and whispered to herself, "You did it, Ivan. You did it." The farm continued to thrive, not just as a place of work, but as a symbol of unity and resilience. Dmitry and Anastasia Ivanova taught their child the same love for the land that Ivan had passed on to them. And Ekaterina, now a grandmother, found in the farm a connection she had never felt before, a peace that could not be bought. The story of Ivan Petrov did not end with his death. It lived on in every plant that blossomed in the fields, in every family that learned something new at the agricultural center, and in every person who heard his story. His humility and strength changed not only his family, but also the heart of someone who seemed unreachable. And so, Ivan's legacy continued, growing like the seeds he had so carefully cultivated, spreading deep roots that would sustain many generations. Did this story touch you in some way? If so, don't forget to like the video and share your feelings in the comments. Your opinion is very important to me. And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming emotional stories. Together, let's continue spreading messages that inspire and transform.